Ali Khamenei was born in 1939 in the holy city of Mashhad, a place defined by pilgrimage, devotion, and centuries of Shiite scholarship. His family belonged to the clerical class, respected but not wealthy. Their home was modest, structured around prayer, study, and discipline. His father, a religious scholar, raised him in an environment where faith-shaped identity and authority came from scripture. Beyond the family walls, Iran was undergoing dramatic transformation. Under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, modernization accelerated. Land reforms, Western alliances, and centralized political control. For traditional religious families, this transformation often felt like cultural displacement. Young Khamenei grew up absorbing this tension between sacred tradition and state-driven modernity. Long before he entered political life, the ideological fault lines of Iran were already shaping him. As a young man, Khamenei pursued formal religious studies in Mashhad before relocating to Qom, Iran's intellectual heart of Shiite theology. There, he encountered the teachings of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, whose sermons openly challenged the legitimacy of the Shah's rule. Khomeini argued that Islam was not merely spiritual guidance, but a complete political system. These ideas resonated deeply with Khamenei. During the 1960s and 1970s, he began delivering sermons critical of the monarchy. His activism drew the attention of SAVAK, the Shah's feared intelligence service. He was arrested multiple times, interrogated, and placed under surveillance. Prison did not silence him, it refined his resolve. The young cleric was no longer just studying doctrine, he was participating in a growing revolutionary current. In 1979, revolution reshaped Iran. Mass demonstrations filled the streets, the Shah fled, and Khomeini returned from exile to establish the Islamic Republic. Khamenei entered the new political structure as one of the revolution's loyal figures. But in 1981, his path nearly ended when a bomb hidden inside a tape recorder exploded during a speech in Tehran. He survived, though his right arm was permanently damaged. In the fragile early years of the Islamic Republic, survival carried symbolic meaning. To supporters, it marked him as protected by destiny. The assassination attempt elevated his stature within the revolutionary elite. What began as a childhood shaped by faith and tension had evolved into a political ascent fueled by endurance and ideological conviction. By the early 1980s, the Islamic Republic was still fragile, surrounded by enemies and divided internally. The Iran-Iraq War had erupted, turning the new state into a battlefield. In this climate of crisis, Ali Khamenei's political trajectory accelerated. In 1981, he was elected president of Iran, a position that, under the new constitution, held significant executive responsibility but remained subordinate to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. As president during wartime, Khamenei became a visible symbol of endurance. Cities were bombed, soldiers were lost by the thousands, and the economy strained under international isolation. His speeches emphasized sacrifice, unity, and resistance. The war was not only a military conflict, it was a test of the revolution's survival. While the presidency did not grant him ultimate authority, it allowed Khamenei to build networks within the system. He strengthened ties with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, whose influence expanded rapidly during the war. The Guards were not just soldiers, they were becoming guardians of the revolution's ideological core. By aligning himself closely with them, Khamenei positioned himself within the security backbone of the state. At the same time, he cultivated relationships within the clerical establishment and political institutions. His power did not come from dramatic moves, but from steady positioning. When the Iran-Iraq War ended in 1988, he had become deeply embedded in the machinery of the Islamic Republic. Then came 1989, a turning point. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the founder of the Islamic Republic, died. The nation faced uncertainty. Traditionally, the supreme leader was expected to possess the highest religious rank. Khamenei did not fully meet that theological threshold. Yet the assembly of experts moved swiftly. In a decision that surprised many observers, they selected him as the new supreme leader. The choice reflected political calculation as much as religious authority. Khamenei was seen as loyal, experienced, and aligned with the revolution's core institutions. In a single vote, he moved from president to the highest authority in Iran. The ascent was complete, but the true consolidation of power was only beginning. When Ali Khamenei became supreme leader in 1989, many questioned whether he possessed the religious stature traditionally associated with the position. But over time, he reshaped the office into something far more political than theological. Under Iran's constitution, the supreme leader commands the armed forces, appoints the head of the judiciary, oversees state broadcasting, and influences the Guardian Council, the body that vets electoral candidates and legislation. These powers placed him above the presidency and parliament. While elections continued, ultimate authority flowed upward. Khamenei understood that survival at the top required not only legitimacy, but control over institutions capable of enforcing stability. Central to this consolidation was the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. Originally established to defend the revolution from internal and external threats, the IRGC evolved into a multi-dimensional force, military, economic, and political. Under Khamenei's leadership, its influence expanded dramatically. The Guards entered construction, telecommunications, oil and gas, and strategic infrastructure. They became not only protectors of the state, but stakeholders in its economy. Loyalty between the supreme leader and the IRGC was mutually reinforcing. In times of unrest or external pressure, this alliance functioned as the regime's backbone. As elected officials came and went, the IRGC remained a constant, aligned closely with the office of the supreme leader. Yet consolidation did not mean calm. Domestic unrest surfaced repeatedly. In 1999, student protests erupted over press restrictions. In 2009, the Green Movement followed a disputed presidential election, bringing massive demonstrations to Tehran's streets. In 2019, economic grievances sparked nationwide protests amid rising fuel prices and sanctions pressure. Each wave of unrest tested the resilience of the system. Khamenei framed these movements as externally influenced attempts to destabilize Iran. The state responded firmly, prioritizing order over accommodation. Through each crisis, the structure held. The supreme leader did not rely on charisma alone. He relied on networks of authority, security, and ideological continuity. Over 3 decades, the system adapted, tightened, and endured, transforming from a revolutionary experiment into an entrenched political architecture. As his authority stabilized at home, Ali Khamenei's strategic vision increasingly extended beyond Iran's borders. The Middle East was entering a new era of instability following the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the later outbreak of the Syrian civil war. Tehran moved decisively to expand its influence. Support for allied militias and political movements in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen became a defining feature of Iran's regional strategy. This network was often described as Iran's strategic depth, a buffer of aligned forces designed to deter adversaries and project influence without direct confrontation. To supporters, it was defensive realism. To critics, it was destabilizing expansion. Either way, Iran was no longer operating in isolation. It was shaping regional power balances. At the same time, the nuclear issue intensified tensions with the West. Years of negotiations culminated in 2015 with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, an agreement limiting Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Khamenei approached the deal cautiously. Publicly, he endorsed it while emphasizing distrust toward the United States. The agreement temporarily eased economic pressure and reopened limited diplomatic space. But in 2018, the United States withdrew from the deal and reinstated sanctions. The fragile equilibrium collapsed. Iran gradually expanded elements of its nuclear activity once again. Sanctions deepened economic strain at home, and rhetoric hardened abroad. The nuclear file returned to the center of global attention, transforming diplomacy into a high-stakes standoff. Beneath official statements and formal negotiations, a quieter conflict unfolded. Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated. Key facilities experienced unexplained explosions. Cyber operations targeted infrastructure. Regional commanders were killed in strikes outside Iran's borders. While responsibility was often denied or left ambiguous, the pattern suggested an undeclared shadow war. For Khamenei, this period demanded strategic calibration, projecting strength without triggering full-scale war. The confrontation was no longer limited to battlefields. It had expanded into cyberspace, intelligence operations, and economic warfare. By the late 2010s, the Islamic Republic stood not only as a regional actor, but as a central figure in one of the most complex geopolitical rivalries of the century. In his later years, Ali Khamenei's public appearances grew less frequent, but his influence remained constant. Speculation about succession intensified as Iran faced mounting economic pressure, regional tension, and internal unrest. Rumors circulated in diplomatic circles and intelligence reports, yet official information about his health remained tightly controlled. When news finally broke of his death, it arrived with shockwaves. State media announced the passing of the supreme leader, triggering immediate national mourning. In Tehran, black banners covered government buildings, and crowds gathered in silence. For a system built around continuity, the absence of its central figure felt seismic. The reaction extended far beyond Iran's borders. Regional allies expressed condolences and reaffirmed solidarity. Adversaries watched closely, calculating implications for stability and strategy. Financial markets fluctuated as uncertainty rippled through energy corridors and geopolitical alliances. Inside Iran, security forces heightened alert levels. The assembly of experts convened under intense scrutiny. In moments like this, systems are tested, not by ideology, but by transition. Would the architecture of power hold, or would competing factions surface in the vacuum? Yet even in mourning, questions lingered. Was his death purely natural, as officially stated? Or did the long shadow conflict that defined the previous decade leave unseen fingerprints? In an era shaped by covert operations, cyber-sabotage, and regional escalation, certainty was elusive. Analysts debated scenarios, but definitive answers remained scarce. What was clear, however, was that an era had ended. For more than 3 decades, Ali Khamenei had stood at the apex of Iran's political system. His departure did not dissolve the structure he built, but it forced the nation and the region to confront an uncertain next chapter. When a political system is constructed around a single central authority, the question of succession becomes more than procedural. It becomes existential. In Iran, the passing of a supreme leader would activate a constitutional mechanism led by the assembly of experts, yet the real weight of transition would extend far beyond formal votes. For more than 3 decades, power has flowed through networks shaped, refined, and guarded at the highest level. A transition would not simply replace a figurehead, it would test whether the architecture of the Islamic Republic can function with the same cohesion without the man who embodied it. Inside the country, every institution would move into calculated alignment. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps would likely assume a visible role in maintaining order and projecting continuity. Senior clerics would weigh religious legitimacy against political pragmatism. Political factions, conservative, pragmatic, reform-minded, would maneuver carefully, aware that the next supreme leader could define Iran's direction for decades. Stability would remain the overriding objective. The system was designed not for spontaneity, but for endurance. The question would not be whether power transfers, it would be how tightly the transfer is controlled. Beyond Iran's borders, the implications would ripple immediately. Regional partners would seek reassurance that alliances remain intact. Rivals would watch for signals of recalibration, division, or opportunity. Energy markets would fluctuate in response to uncertainty, while diplomats would analyze every public statement for strategic clues. Yet history suggests that deeply institutionalized systems rarely fracture overnight. The Islamic Republic has survived war, sanctions, unrest, and international isolation. Leadership may evolve, tone may shift, but structures built over decades tend to move with deliberate inertia. In the end, the real legacy of a supreme leader is not only in speeches or policies, it is in whether the system he shaped continues to endure beyond him.